Hi, welcome to Building SaaS with Python and Django. My name is Matt Lehman, and on this stream we work on a Django application, and we're going to continue on that path this evening. My plan tonight is to integrate a new tool. It's one I've not used before, so it'll be a learning experience. It is a tool. Hey, Mirage, welcome. It is a tool called flake8-bugbear. That's going to be our focus tonight. I guess you can see it up on the screen, but I'm going to leave it in the chat here in case folks come in later. Flake8, if you are not aware of it, is a Python tool for checking for lint. Lint being a category of problems that might be in your code that can be analyzed by a tool and found statically. It doesn't have to run the code. So what it does is some parsing of the code and probably turns it into an abstract syntax tree and then looks for different problems like unused variables and that sort of stuff. And flake8-bugbear I've learned about recently, and it's sort of an extension set onto flake8, some extra rules. And I saw it, and I saw it from someone I trust in the Django community, and so I think I want to try it out and see what it finds. We'll see if my code is full of problems that we need to correct, or if I'm doing okay. So there is an aspect to this that could be interesting as well. So there's two outcomes. Either I'm doing great and the code that I've got on my project is fine, or I have some laundry list of stuff to fix. And I'm going to try and show if it is that longer version, I'm going to try and show a list of, or a technique for handling that kind of list when you have a bunch of things to resolve. So here's the page. It's under the Python Code Quality Organization is where flake8-bugbear exists. And then there's documentation for it. And I looked through this briefly before joining the stream. And it seems like if you install this thing, it should automatically work according to this. So I don't think there's anything we have to do except for installing it. So let's prepare things to do that. There are actually two levels that I need to have this installed at for my application. One is within my development tools. And the reason for that is my editor knows about flake8. And flake8 can report its error messages in such a way that it shows up and gets highlighted to my editor. But if I don't have the package installed, hey, Quatley, welcome. If I don't have the package installed, it's not going to show up in the editor. So if I am missing that, I wouldn't catch it until later because there's another place that I'm going to catch it as well. So let's go in here and search for flake8, not flake9, flake8-bugbear. I'm doing this to find out the version. So 22.8.23. Okay. Let's add that here, flake8. And equal, what did I say, 22.8.23. All right, so that's one place we'll add it. And then I've got the other, we'll get to over here in a minute. This is pre-commit. I'll talk about that. Pre-commit's a great tool, but we'll add it over there in a minute. So first I want to get this installed. Whoops, I got flake8 twice. That's not going to work. Flake8-bugbear. Bugbear is an unusual name. There is a definition at the top of the documentation saying what a bugbear is. It's a noun, cause for fear, anxiety, or irritation. Okay. So if you're not a native English speaker and you've not seen this word before, here you go. There's a definition of what a bugbear is. So I guess it's like extra stuff that can cause you concern, I suppose. So we need to install that. And I had to install on this M1 Mac in a slightly weird way because I had to compile one of my packages. So I'm going to actually search through my history looking for the requirements dev file because I don't remember exactly how I invoked it. So requirements dev, see what comes up. Yeah, you can see I've got this some extra environment variables that I was passing in, and that was in order to have the right C files for this graphiz package that I needed. We're going to use that command again to install everything. So I'm going to pull it from my history by using bang, the exclamation point, and then give it a number from the history. So if you've not done this before, this is a way to recall something from your history. So it will bring the command back up from that list, and then I can just hit enter, and it will go and get all of that. You can see that at the bottom, everything else was already satisfied, so it only installed this one new package. All right, that's step one. The other thing I want to do is add it to my pre-commit. And pre-commit is a tool that does what it sounds like. Before I commit any of my code with GitHub or Git specifically, it will run various checks on my code. And one of those checks is flake8, and it tests against the files that are part of that change set. It doesn't test all of your files every time. Some pre-commit hooks will do different behaviors, but that's what flake8 does. So in order to make this work, we need an additional dependencies section. So we're going to do that here, and it looks like it goes at the same level of depth as the ID parameter. I'm going to follow suit with what's down below there with Bandit, and we're going to add in flake8-bugbear with that same version of 22.8.23. And so that should be enough for pre-commit to realize that something has changed. And so we can, I think what I'll go ahead and do, actually I might have to pull some, oh, good, I didn't have to merge anything. So we've got those two file changes, and I'm going to add them to my Git stage. You can see there's stage there, and it's just the addition of two new packages. I'm going to try and commit them. And pre-commit itself didn't decide it needed anything new, so we might have to prompt that. I don't know how it handles additional dependencies, but let's say add flake8-bugbear. Now, there's a potential that by doing this and committing it, I'm actually putting my my application into a bad state, because it's now going to have some additional checks. And part of my CI system, let's bring up Github Tests. One of the things that my CI system does is it runs, I thought it did it anyway. Am I missing that one? Well, look at that. I'm missing a check. I didn't anticipate that. One of the things it should do is run flake8. Maybe I didn't bother. Oh, you know what it is? I started using a different tool to run flake8. So I have two tools in play. That's why GitHub is not running it. So if I come down here and say, you can see that there's actually two things that are here. And I don't know why. This is the second one is the one that runs other tools. I don't know why it is failing here, so I'm curious what happened. How did that get committed? Okay, well, I'm going to try running all of my hooks locally, and apparently I've got some stuff to fix up. So we can run pre-commit. It doesn't have to be executed only when you're doing a commit. You can actually run it at any time. So pre-commit comes with like a command line tool that's available to you. And normally you would set this pre-commit configuration file, and you can go learn all about pre-commit at precommit.com in case you're curious. And because I'm not going to get too deep into how pre-commit works, but you can run pre-commit and run it manually. And so the run command takes the name of a hook that you want to run and some files that you want to run against. So you got these flags that get passed in. So I think what I want to do is run, the hook is optional. And if you leave off the hook, those are the different things like flake8 or Bandit or any of those other things. If you leave off the hook, it'll run them all. So what I'm going to try right now is to let pre-commit run against all the files. So I'm going to, let's clear that output. We can see it a little better. Pre-commit run -a is the short flag name for all files. And so it's going to be, oh wow, maybe it wasn't running because this is my new machine. Hey, blah, blah, welcome. And I hadn't actually set a pre-commit yet. So that's probably why that last commit failed, because nothing was actually keeping me honest. Interesting. All right, so this integration of this tool is not going to be as interesting as I thought. Only one error, which I guess is good on me. It means I'm doing an okay job writing some code here. We're also going to check and see, aha. One of my hooks wanted to rewrite the signature. It didn't need the quotes on course task anymore, and it rewrote my construction syntax for using a set. Okay, that's fine with me. So let's add that to the stage, and we'll try and commit again. Why did it allow that? Pre-commit, something is not right. Pre-commit install. Go. There we go. That's what I expected to see. And it did it again. So sometimes one of these hooks that I have will run multiple passes. So the first time it said, oh, you don't need quote marks for your course task. And then after that pass, there was another optimization it could make, is instead of having optional course task, it could switch the syntax to the course task or none syntax, which is why it failed a second time and did that rewrite a second time. And there's now, if we triggered as well, the optional import is no longer needed because my plugin did rewriting. So let's go to the courses models file, and we can take out this from typing import optional, because my plugin's not going to do that one for some reason. Okay, cool. I'm still confused about why flake8-bugbear didn't complain again. So we're gonna have to do some research there. Something happened. We saw that earlier. There was definitely a message there. Oh, you know, I got it. I know what it is. All right, one thing at a time. Let's see. Fix Py upgrade items missed because pre-commit wasn't installed. That's really what happened. And it gives me some peace of mind knowing how my CI system got into a bad state. So the reason why we're not seeing anything is because, as I said, pre-commit will try and only work on the files that you're actually changing. So nice, Nadia, or Nadia, sorry if I'm butchering your name. I've been running Vim for, what year is this? Well, I'll let you do the math. I've been running it since 2006, so many, many, many years. So I'm not switching to VS Code. Nothing against VS Code. I have my son use VS Code when I teach him. And then as far as dark themes, if you go back and you check the history of my streams, you'll see a period of about 6 months where folks like yourself nudged me to use dark themes, and I gave it the good college try. I gave it a try for a whole semester, and I still didn't like it, so I switched back. So that's the reason why no dark theme. But thank you for the questions. So as I was saying, pre-commit only runs on the files that you've actually modified by default. So we don't see our change or a complaint about this B007 because we weren't, when we were doing these other changes, we were only running against the ones that we just had modified and doing normal git commit stuff. So if we want to see that error message again, we need to run pre-commit run -a, and we'll see that flake8 error pop up again. All right. So this is where, at this point, we're going to research this issue. This is kind of the fun part about this, is like I'm hoping to learn something from this tool, that it teaches me of some different problems and why they're problems, and hopefully that you can learn why they're problems too. And then I think there are some additional things that we can configure in this project that were like extra picky stuff. So I don't know if I'm going to like them or not. I have to read through what the extra ones are. But we'll fix this one, and then we'll revisit the list and see if there are other things that we want to adopt. Okay, but the warning was B007. So let's take a look and see what the documentation says. So a loop control variable is not used within the loop body. If this is intended, start the name with an underscore. All right, maybe it's something I just forgot to clean up. Let's go take a look. So core models, and then this was line 116. Oops. Oh, good. We can see, because I added flake8-bugbear to my list of local packages, we can see that my editor is showing that here as well. Okay, I remember this code. Yeah, this is basically, so what it's highlighting, I suppose, is that I have a loop variable and then I didn't use it. Yeah, I've got plenty of tips and tricks up my sleeve. I can pause to do some Vim stuff if folks are interested. There are many things that I've learned over the years. So for this for loop, we are not actually using it. So all we care about there was we're going through each of the days in this week attribute that is on the model. And I'm not really going to get into too much of that. You probably all don't really care necessarily. I think the easiest thing to do is basically flag this variable as a don't care kind of variable. And conventionally in Python, a way to do, there's a couple ways to do that. One is to say just underscore like this. Underscore is like, I really don't care. It means nothing at all. And forget about it. Now there's a problem with this, or it could be a problem, especially if you are doing internationalization. One of the ways that internationalization is done is using a tool chain called, oh man, I'm drawing a blank on it. Let's go look. Get text, that's the name. We can still look though, because I can show you the thing that we care about. So Python docs, get text is part of the standard library, if I recall correctly. We can go to your standard Python documentation page, and this is the link that you're going to care about most, the library reference. There's tons of other good stuff in there. I'm not saying the documentation is bad or missing, but this is where a lot of the most interesting stuff is, in my opinion. And there's this internationalization package, and it has this thing called get text. Within here, there are a number of functions that you would use, and you use these things on your strings. And the idea is, if you wrap these calls, maybe there's an example. Yeah, here it is. Here's a good example. So this is the convention. So this get text, this particular get text function is often abbreviated as underscore. And the reason it's abbreviated as underscore is because this is how you do translation. You stick with your source language, which in a lot of cases, let's be honest, is English. And then if you are going to translate it, you wrap it in this function call. You call it. So they don't want this to be some big thing that is on all of your strings. So they pick something short and concise that kind of exists that way. And so what you're left with is something that looks, it has a little bit of extra line noise with the extra function call, but it mostly looks like a string. That's the idea behind it. I'm not planning to do translation for my app. I'm just serving an English audience. I don't have any ability to translate. I don't have any interest in translating for different markets. That's not really where my app is going. Sorry if you are non-native speakers and we're hoping to get this app in your language. That's not my plan. But that is one gotcha is like using an underscore as a local variable name then will mask that underscore if you followed that convention when doing translation. So one way to get around that, and I think what the message was saying, is that you can keep the variable name, and just prefix it with an underscore to kind of indicate to Python, hey, this is a private variable. So let's do that. Let's see if it works the way we want it to. And I think I like this style because it declares the intent of what are we iterating over. We're still, it's not like, so we're not going to use this variable. We're going to have underscore day, but it's nice to know that it is a day, that we're looping over, it's a list of days. I hope that would be fairly self-evident from the fact that we're doing a reverse on a week, but it just, it gives another hint to you that this is what it's doing. So I think with that, we probably have all of the flake8 stuff fixed. Yeah, cool. So let's go ahead and fix it as step 1. So fix identified flake8 bugbear issue. Okay. Now, let's see if it's worth making it go in picky mode. And there's another thing that I think we should probably look for. I can't remember where I configure flake8, if it's in PyProject or if it's in a different one. I don't know. Python, the ecosystem seems to be figuring itself out of where it wants to put stuff. And not all of the tools agree on which configuration files are there. All right, so we've got setup.cfg is where I'm storing my flake8 configuration. And so let's return, because there was a note there about having to set some config file if we want to do this. So I'm not going to go through the list of warnings. That's kind of boring. But somewhere in the docs here, it said how to add more. Opinionated warnings. The following warnings are disabled by default because they are controversial. It may or may not apply to you. Enable them explicitly in your configuration if you find them useful. Okay. B901. Using return X in a generator function used to be syntactically invalid in Python 2. Okay. Fine. In Python 3, return X can be used in a generator as a return value in conjunction with yield from. Users coming from Python 2 may expect the old... Okay, I'm not supporting Python 2. I don't care. And I'm not writing this for anybody but myself. So I didn't even know about this behavior, so I'm not affected by this. All right. B902. Invalid first argument used for method. Use self for instance methods and class for class methods, which includes new. All right, so that seems like a reasonable thing to add. It's basically saying follow the conventions of the language. And if I've messed that up anywhere, I think that's valid. So let's see, how do we actually enable these? So I want to at least enable 902, and then we'll move on to the others. So let's look down a little bit. How to enable. Okay, it's almost like they know what people expect here. To enable Bugbear's opinionated checks, the B900X series, specify an extend select command line option, which I don't want to do because I want to have this be baked into my configuration, or extend select option in your config. Okay. Some of Bugbear's checks require other flake8 checks to be disabled. E501. All right, so let's forget about the ignore part for now because we haven't read through all of those opinionated checks yet, so I don't know if I care. Oh, you can turn them all on? But, all right, maybe we should just read them because there's not that many. So, because this isn't going to hurt if I have it on, because I'm not going to be using it. And the fact that I want this one on, if I want more than one on, then maybe we turn them all on with the B9 thing and get it all done. All right, so let's read 903. Use collections name tuple for data classes that only set attributes in an init method and do nothing else. If the attribute should be mutable, define the... Okay, so this sounds useful if I ever use name tuples. Gives me a hint to make them more efficient by using slots. B904, within an except clause, raise exceptions with raise from error or raise from none to distinguish them from errors and exception handling. That's a good idea. That's exception chaining. And then B950, this is a pragmatic equivalent to PyCode styles E501. It considers max line length, but only triggers when the value has been exceeded by more than 10%. Oh, that's interesting. You will no longer be forced. So this just kind of doesn't matter because I use black. And black says it must be under 88 characters. That's how it's configured. So I think what black is going to do is make it so that this always passes no matter what. So it's harmless to turn it on. And it says disable E501 to... Oh, okay. So you could get a scenario where E501 would complain if you went over the limit, but the 950 would allow it by 10%, I guess. Okay. I think so. We would need to turn that. So I think what we want is to take these two lines, and we're going to come down to here and drop them there. And then instead of they were saying instead of specifying them all individually, we'll just say B9. And this is the key. Here's why I'm doing this. Future-proof your config. So it's saying, like, if you care about these specific things, they only have, what is that, 5 of them right now? But if they add a 6th one, then if you put B9 instead, you automatically get the 6th one if you do a package upgrade. So that's why I think it's good to have that style. So let's do that. We've got it now in our config, and let's run pre-commit run -a again. See if it catches anything. Hey, found it. Ah, okay. Check out which ones are there. So there's a handful. We go to the reports contexts, and yep, that's a class method for sure. I'm using self instead of class. I'm going to switch that to class. One down. And let's look at courses, tests, factories. Courses, test, factories. Oh, well, that's annoying. Because this decorator is actually like changing what you might think this would be. So what's happening here is the plugin thinks that this is a regular method on a class. And so it thinks that this should be called self instead of course. But this post generation thing is saying something different. And it's because the factories themselves are kind of meta. So what you're getting with this grade levels thing that's here is not an instance of the factory. Instead, it's the thing that the factory produced. So it's not a course factory object, it is a course object. So this is actually wrong. This is flagging something that's incorrect. And in fact, I have an open PR. I think that this was never merged. I think that the factory boy documentation Factory boy. Oh, new computer, getting my links back. The factory boy documentation shows post generation, an example. I think it's this one. Well, they did correct it. They changed it to object. Or maybe there were a couple of examples. I had a PR that I don't think ever got merged. Once upon a time, it used to say something else. Or maybe it's in a different spot. There was more than one. Extracting parameters. No. Oh, cool. Seems like they fixed it. To recognize that it's not an object. This used to say self or class. I can't remember. It's one of the two. Now I'm curious enough to know if that's true, I can go close my PR if it doesn't apply anymore. Let's see. I have a pull request. Am I still in here? Yeah, look at that. It's in, recipes. Let's see if it's still in recipes. Recipes? Post generation? No, still wrong. Okay, so this is what the documentation shows, and like I showed and just talked about, it's not correct. So the point is that the Bugbear plugin is confused because this is a weird case with Factory Boy, and so we need to be able to say, all right, Flake8, please be quiet. And this is where there are multiple ways to handle this. You could say, so the easiest way to handle this is to attach a comment to that line that says no QA. But this is not the greatest solution. And the reason is it's very broad. So what if there was other problems with this line? We have basically turned off Flake8 completely for line 11. So what you can do, Flake8 documentation, there's a way to specify, to like scope the thing you want to ignore down to the one error case that you're trying to ignore. So let's see where's ignore. There. So it's this style. Yeah, I'm gonna make sure that I'm telling you the truth. Yep, okay. So it is saying like, if you leave it off, it'll ignore everything. Yeah, if we have a particularly bad line of code, we can ignore every error using just no QA, which is what I just showed you. But if we know the specific error that we're trying to ignore, then we can turn that one off. So let's see if that works. Let's prove it out. So we should have, we knew it was, what was that, B950? Let's just make up a number, B888. And okay, I was wrong anyway. So look at if you look at the status line at the bottom of my Vim editor there, I hope that's in frame. You'll see B902 is the actual message that's coming up. So we want to change that from 888 to 902, and now it is ignoring just that one. So that's the behavior we want. All right, one more. So we've got students' views. And that is B904. What line was that on? 130. Oh, that's interesting. Well, it's kind of a weird one. And it's weird because, all right, well, what's it saying, first of all? Notice what's happening here. We've got an exception. The grade work does not exist. And when it doesn't exist, we are raising another exception. And this is kind of a weird oddity of Django, in my opinion. It's a way to do a bit of flow control using exceptions. And it's normally frowned upon, to be honest, but this is kind of deep in a class view. So the way that what we're trying to do is we're trying to issue a 404 response to the user. They got to here and there's data that's missing. So they shouldn't be able to grade whatever they were, however they got here. And that's the flow. But this exception is not something that is for a programmer. It's for the framework. It's for Django. It's for Django to catch the 404. Notice specifically that is an HTTP 404. I think this is the only exception that does this. I could be mistaken on that part. But then transform the return into an HTTP 404 response. So what I'm about to do doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but I'm going to do it anyway. So the reason what this message is saying is that when you're in the state where you have an accept block and then you raise another thing, there is a way to essentially connect the exceptions together so that what the developer reading the traceback that would see this exception would see something like, and maybe you've encountered this, it would be a first traceback, and then there's some message that says something along the lines of was caused by or in the process of, I don't remember the exact message, and it shows you another traceback. And so with older versions of Python, you actually lost some of that visibility. So if you raised within an exception block, you'd only see the exception from where you did that last raise, which was a problem with visibility of understanding why, how did this particular exception get raised. So by adding this from feature at the end of a raise block, it allowed Python to chain those things together so you could get the full context of multiple tracebacks for whatever was causing the problem. And I think it comes with like multiple stack trace sets of stack information as well. There's some details that I'm sure I'm glossing over. So the way to solve this, and it's going to look a little goofy, but the way to solve this is to say from graded work dot does not exist. And it gets rid of the error. It looks a little weird, but that's the reality of the fix here. So this is a strange one. It's something that I think I want the value of this guard in other places, and it's not important enough. The other way I could do this is I could say no, this is silly. Like I'll just ignore it this time, and maybe that's okay. Maybe we want to say B904 because it's obvious. And actually, maybe I'll do that because it's obvious in this case of what's going on. There's only one line. It's directly above it, so there's no ambiguity. And as I just walked you through, HTTP 404 is not a developer kind of trace exception that you want to see. It's more for the Django framework itself. So I think I'm good leaving it with it. But you could see that either of these solutions worked. This one, you could ignore this case, or you could say from, and then the previous exception. All right, so with any luck, we should be able to run pre-commit run-a again and get clean bill of health all the way across, which we do. So I'm going to add that and commit all this stuff. And we'll say fix flake8-bugbear. What do they call them? Extensions? opinionated warnings. All right. So that's flake8-bugbear. That was nice and easy. We didn't have to do any of the tricks that I've sometimes had to do. So let's imagine, just for the sake of it, that there were 100 of these. And there's no way I'm going to get through them all in the stream. In fact, I'm not going to be streaming a super long time this evening. But what would you have done if it was broken down into, like, let's say there were 4 categories of errors, and there were 50 of one, 40 of another, and a bunch, and then just like one of them that you actually wanted to fix that night. But what do? There are a couple of strategies. One strategy is set flake8 in a mode where it doesn't fail on when any of those messages come up, and it just shows them to you every time. My recommendation is don't follow that strategy. The reason is it's kind of and I know this city planning theory has sort of been debunked, so let's not get into this, but I'll use the analogy that is at least familiar to people of the broken window theory of if a window is broken in a city, there is less inclination and it doesn't get fixed, then we allow as a people, we allow other stuff to become broken as well. And so in this model where you leave the errors behind, then there's not really an incentive to clean them up. And so what happens is, and this is where it moves beyond hypothetical, and I've observed this in reality, especially on teams, is that nobody cleans it up. It's a tragedy of the commons. And then people just have this like low-level anxiety about, I've got these problems in my system and they're not being fixed and nothing's getting better. Furthermore, it's hard to know in that mode, have I made it worse? Because you don't necessarily know the before and the after. So if you went from, let's say, 248 warnings or error messages to 249, are you going to notice? Probably not. So that's why that strategy is not that great. Instead, what you can do is, let's say you had 249 and you weren't prepared to solve them at all. What I would recommend instead is creating a list of categories that you can then tackle and work down over time. And the way to do that is what you can see right here. So there's this ignore. Now I'm using ignore for different reasons here, and this has to, in flake8's context, this has to do with because flake8 and black don't quite play nicely. So these, for me, these are permanently ignored. But you could imagine that, okay, maybe I had tons of those exception problems, which was 904, I think. So you could say, I'm going to ignore them for now. I still want all my other checks, and I'm still going to demand that stuff passes, but for the moment, I'm going to ignore it. And then you use whatever issue tracker you have, and you have a list of all the things that you have ignored and are not prepared to fix. But when you get the time to actually go fix them, the process is basically go into that ignore list, remove it from the list, run the tool, get your list of everything you have to fix, and start fixing some. Maybe you can't fix it all, you put the ignore back on, but you commit the stuff that you did fix. And that strategy of using the ignore to your advantage as a temporary thing is what allows you to take one of these really hard problems where you might have tons and tons of warnings and turn it into bite-sized problems. The same strategy, I've done this strategy multiple times and in work context where there were thousands and thousands of things to fix because it was an introduction of a new tool that the team just didn't have that as part of their convention. So it's not any fault of like any particular programmer. There just wasn't any expectation that those things would be fixed. So tools that I've done this on is flake8 is one. Obviously, it really comes down to any tool that has the ability to do ignoring, like you see here. So linting is a very common kind of category that these tools are meant to sort of turn these checks on and off. It's a pretty common feature that you'd find in them. And so Flake8, I've done this with, what's it called? Pylint is another tool. It's another linting tool that has tons of opinions that you can enable and disable to your heart's content. And the other big one that it follows the same pattern is if you want to start adding type annotations to your code. Let me find it here, pyproject.toml. So MyPy is the tool for that. MyPy allows you to, it has a bunch of knobs that you can turn on it, frankly, of different levels of severity of how strict do you want to be with your type annotations, and how exact do you want to make stuff. You can start off with a very permissive policy, and MyPy actually will allow you to have like down to the individual Python package or module level, different sets of rules. So if you have tons of code, which I have been in projects that have been working on Python projects with over 500,000 lines of code in them, it's impossible technically not impossible, but extremely unlikely to fix all of the issues in one big PR. And the time it would take to do that and the risk of doing that all at once is pretty cost prohibitive. So taking this strategy where you kind of add to an allow list over time, these are checks that I want you to now add this extra rigor to this particular package or module, is a good way to progressively make your code better. Anyway, that is my working theory on how to introduce tools into your chain over time. Is to have a very definitive, you must have this pass, and then with liberal use of this kind of ignore strategy. There are other benefits for this. So why does that matter? Or what are some other good attributes? There's probably a couple things. So remember earlier, a moment ago, I just said that you might have 248 warnings, and would you even notice 249? And not really, right? If you adopt the policy where you're ignoring a bunch of stuff, then what you're left behind with as a developer is now everything is green, it's zero, right? And if you've introduced a problem yourself, it's going to go from 0 to 1, or however many handful that you get on your branch as you're working through your code changes. And at that point, you really have a clear idea. Furthermore, you can use the enforcement of these tools and the fact that the zero issues policy, and put that on your CI system. So you can make it so that all of your checks are required to pass in whatever CI system you're using, whether that's GitHub Actions or Circle CI or any of the myriad of tools that are out there, and basically set it so that you and your teammates cannot commit code until everything is passing. And this is just a really good way of ensuring that that quality is always there. Because if they can't merge, and this is not just they, it's not like a you versus them, it's if everybody on our team cannot merge unless all of our checks are passing, then we have effectively said, this is the quality bar that we care about for our organization. It's a pretty powerful technique. And there's a psychological aspect to it as well. And that psychological aspect is basically, if a tool is telling you you're wrong, it's much better than a pull request. If, getting back to this example here, if I didn't have this feature on and somebody was doing a pull request review on my code and noticed that I had it like this, and they could then comment and say, hey Matt, you forgot the from here, and this makes it hard to see the full history of what's going on with the traceback. Essentially, it becomes this conversation and a potential point of friction between you and a teammate. There's a learning opportunity there, but you can learn just as easily from the tool. Like this message that we saw had links to this kind of stuff. They tell you why there's reasonings for this of helping you understand the problem. So you can kind of self-educate without having to force your teammate to do that work for you. And that psychological benefit of saying, just let tools enforce the problems or report on the problems for us, eliminates huge swaths of unnecessary conversation. And I would venture to say that if you go and you look at popular open source projects, a large number of them, I can't say that all tools and all communities feel this way, but a large number of them are going to make extensive use of continuous integration and extensive use of continuous integration checks to just say, we've automated this, and if you want to be a contributor, you must pass all of these before we're even going to consider it. So that's a pretty powerful way to get the code quality that a project might depend on. Anyway, that was a kind of a sidebar into my philosophy behind tool management as someone who's had to do it many times on many different code bases. And the strategy is always the same. It's always like chip away at it, put a set of ignore list, record in the, it's important that you don't just put it in the ignore list and then never come back to it, in my opinion. So it's important that you capture it in your issue tracker and try to find time and periods to progressively add the extra checking. It just makes your code better overall. It's been my experience, and it catches a lot of bugs that you'd otherwise be dealing with in your real system and that your users deal with, and it's going to save you some trouble. This is going to be a shorter stream tonight. I think I don't want to go into too much. I don't want to start a new project. I will get into a little bit of Vim tips, I guess, to close it off. So yeah, there's a nice Nadia earlier commented on what tips would I give since I've been using Vim for, well, let's do the math now. Is that 16 years? That sounds right. Yeah, it's a long time. And so there are things that the average Vim project may not have. Even the fact that I'm using splits right now is that might be foreign to some of you. So at any point, if you are a Vim user or if you're a budding Vim user, you may go look at my dot files, which are here. I keep them public, so partly because I have worked at different companies and I want to be able to clone my own configuration because it's important to me, and partly because I'm not hiding anything here, and it's just a good way to share, here's what I actually do. So if you dig in here, you can see I've got my dot files, and dot files is another thing that you might be unfamiliar with. They refer to the files in a home directory that that are hidden by default. In your standard Linux operating system, if you do an ls, you're not going to see all the files. You only see the files that do not prefix with a dot. But if you do -a, then, and I usually do ls-al to see all the long version, then you start to see all of these dot files. Specifically, dot files in the sense of configuration often refer to the dot files that you'll find in a home directory. So if I did an ls-al on my home directory, which is what the tilde character stands for, you'll see what's in here. And here's where you're going to see the magic of how my project works. Is the first thing I do is I clone my dot files into my home, and then I've got a script that will do some symbolic linking to files that I want to exist in my whatever machine I'm on with different configurations. So my Vim directory translates to .vim, which is where Vim will look for configuration files. And you can see ZSHENV, ZSHRC. All of these files are in well-established locations that the tools that I use will look for in order to find their information. So that is why I do that with my dot files. So as you're reading this, you can go, and if you need to find that translation of where is this going to go, you can look at this bootstrap file that I have, which is a little script that I run that does some symbolic linking and basically does some configuration in here. It's not the cleanest code in the world, but it works for me and is not terribly long either. But getting back to Vim, I think the most noteworthy thing in here is this Vimrc file. So in Vimrc, this is where you can find all of the plugins that I use with my setup. And I try and comment where I can, so folks have a good understanding of what is this for. But it's not like this is not like meant to be an awesome list or something like that. And I'm sure there is an awesome Vim list out there that you can use. Awesome lists are great for doing some package discovery. I am about to click on some stuff that I've never seen before, so these might be great. These might be garbage. I'm not sure. Yeah, these are popular things right here. So you could use this tool. This is actually a pretty fancy one that special. A lot of awesome lists that I've seen are just GitHub repositories that use the README and list a bunch of projects. But this is where you could go find popular stuff. It's cool. I like this one though. It shows by popularity how many times they're used. So my list in my Vimrc is the opinionated set of tools that I like to use, but don't be afraid to go out and check for some different plugins. And maybe that's a tip number one, is there are different schools of thought with Vim. And for a long time I was in the school of thought that Vim is this editor that is available, is pretty ubiquitous. And it's on like a lot of Linux operating systems. It's there in ways that a lot of editors are not going to be there. Like you can't run VS Code in a terminal, to my knowledge. So knowing Vim without any configuration is a powerful technique. And so one philosophy is make no customizations and just learn straight up Vim. And I, as someone who used to work in defense contracting and in classified labs, and I couldn't bring files and stuff into those laboratories, that philosophy worked for me because I didn't have any other choices. But after I left, I used to work for Lockheed, which is the defense contractor. After I left Lockheed and had my own machine, I was persuaded by a fellow coworker who also used Vim, that that customization is a worthwhile endeavor. There are things out there that will make you a faster developer without a doubt if you actually seek to customize your editor. And the handful that I think are worth calling out from my perspective, if I had like a top three, what would they be? One would be there are probably two that I just use all the time. One of them is my file searching tool. So I use leader keys. That's another thing you should know about. Leader keys is a keyboard sequence that are like custom shortcuts, essentially. Is how you should think about it. I believe the default leader key is backslash, I think. But I have actually mapped it so that my leader key is a space bar. And before I get into that, the way a leader key works is you press the leader key and then you follow it by another key in order to execute the custom command. So it's kind of like a 1-2 punch sort of thing. And so I've set my leader key to be the space bar. And this is a feature that is pretty unique to Vim in this way, the ability to like use the spacebar for something else. And it becomes from the fact that Vim is a modal editor. Right now, I am in the standard view mode, for moving around. And then when I want to actually edit my code, I switch into insert mode and actually make my changes. So there are different ways of interacting with the editor based on the mode you're in. And so that gives me like this command mode that I'm in. I can use the spacebar as my tool to like jump around. So I can hit spacebar A, and it brings up in the bottom there, you can see RG. And the A is because I used to use Silver Searcher, which was AG, and so A fit, and then I never changed it. So I'm not, it's permanently spacebar A for me, but that's not the really important part. The important part is that this is an ultra fast file searching tool. It's a tool called ripgrep, and this plugin that I have is this one right here, Vim and Vim ripgrep. And what it does is it integrates ripgrep as the search tool that's built into Vim. So with this leader command of spacebar A, and you can go see how I did that in my Vimrc, I can type in something that I want to search for. So let's say I see on this file that courses, and then I hit enter, and it brings up all of my search results, and I can scan through all of these. I can resize this. I can see them a little better if I need to, like so. And then I've got this. This is called the quick fix window. I don't have time to get into all of Vim, but yeah, this is one tool that I cannot live without, because once I'm in here, once I find the thing that I'm looking for, I can hit enter on that and jump straight to that file. It's pretty amazing. Okay, I'll get to your question here in just a moment here, Mirage. So that is plugin number one that I recommend. And oh, by the way, if you go the plugin route, you need a system to actually install plugins. And so the way to get started with that is with a tool called Vimplug. There are other ones. I use Vimplug. It's pretty simple. I'm drawing a blank on even the Pathogen, I think is the name of the other plugin system that's out there. That's pretty popular. There's a handful. Vimplug, it seems to be a really simple one that has worked great for me and just like does what I want. Really, all it does is kind of add this plug command and a couple of different commands. It's super easy for me. Okay, so that's for file searching. You could use, so Vim has a built-in one called grep. It is a little, it's got some stuff that you have to learn to deal with grep internally inside of Vim. It's not as fast. That's the other thing. The other critical plugin for me is a fuzzy finder. And so for me, I press spacebar C. Again, this is another one that I used to have a different plugin called Control P. So that's why it was C, because control starts with C. And it brings up a little file explorer here that is all of my Git files. So as you might have been watching as I'm like navigating around, what I'll do when I need to open up a new file is I'll hit spacebar C, and I'll start doing a fuzzy file find on the file that I want to go to. So if I need to go to the students models, I type studmo, apparently. I just type a few letters from each of those words, and the fuzzy finder will very quickly get me the result I want, and then I hit enter, and it opens up that file. So that's a super powerful one. All right. So this was, I guess my number 3 plugin is related to your question, Mirage. And it has to do with the plugin called Vim Test. That's where test file that is in the comments there in the chat is coming from. So if you install Vim Test, that's the important thing. And from there is where Vim Test gets really interesting. So definitely check out Vim Test. It's a cool one. And what Vim Test does is it lets you run your test code inside of your editor, so you don't have to run it in a separate terminal. It's pretty cool, and I use it very often in this stream. You all have seen, if you've been around for any number of streams, you've seen me use it many times. So to answer your question, Miraj, is like test file. The way to get started is you actually have to be in a test file. Like if I try and run, for me, test file is spacebar F, and it was apparently able to pick that up. I must have had a different one open. Let's pretend like I'm a brand new Vim session. So I just am starting Vim from, like, I'm here on my terminal. I fire up Vim. I go to Students Models. Let's go back there. I'm going to do spacebar F, and now we're getting the message that you were seeing right there, where it says you're not in a test file. And the reason for that is you're not in a test file. So Vim Test needs to it's trying to do discovery. That's the real objective. Is it looks at what you were. It goes from, as a reference point. It starts from. It starts from a file that you've had open before in some of your buffers. So I could run my whole suite. Like if I hit spacebar S, well, it won't even work with that. So there's that moment in which you have to at least have visited a test file first. So if let's say we just go to Students Test Models. Now the simple fact that I've opened up a test file now opens up the possibility of running all of these commands. So I could do spacebar F, which is equivalent to test file, and it is detected that I am in the test models file and is able to do its discovery mechanism. So it tries to say, like, look through what buffers were you in, and the first time I don't remember actually what variables it loads, and it's probably discoverable somehow. Actually, let's see what happens if we do file last nearest suite visit. Okay, doesn't look like it's an option that shows up there. It's like the test data. So internally, I can only assume Vim Test is storing some bit of state about what file were you in, and then from there, it's trying to infer what test to run. So the one that I use most often that you'll see me use is actually one called test nearest. And I do it with a shortcut command, so you never see what I'm typing, but it's test nearest. And the idea with test nearest is that it starts at the line you're currently on in your editor, and it looks for something that looks like a test and tries to execute that. So I'm on line 36 or 37 right here. I'm highlighting it so you can see it a little better. So I'm going to do test nearest, which for me is I map to spacebar T. So it's 2 keystrokes to run a test. What it does, it's the test nearest thing was going to look for the closest function, which is going to be this one up above. It looks up, and it's going to find test factory. And so it's going to put together, it knows that I'm using PyTest, or a PyTest style. And so it strings together the style formatting that will execute a proper PyTest test. I had to do a little bit of modification for my Django app. So Miraj, maybe your question is related to the configuration of Vim Test, and I'll get to that in just a second. So test nearest can test whatever's closest. So in this case, like here I am, I'm at test student, and I'm going to do test nearest again. And now it's going to run the whole class because that's the scope that it sees. It continues to march up the scope. And if I go a line above, I think it will do the whole file because it can't figure out that it's in a class either. So it kind of progressively works up the hierarchy. And that's the full scope that it gets at. Vim Test can also run the entire suite. If you do test suite, of course, you need to have a reasonably fast test suite in order to make that worthwhile. But there we go, where it ran all of my tests. I usually don't go that approach because I like to see the code coverage numbers, and Vim Test is not configured to do coverage by default, so I don't typically use this command, but it is available. All right, so possible configuration problems. And this might be for you here, Miraji. Django, by default, wants to use a unit test style testing setup. And if you've been following along with my stuff and you've installed PyTest Django, then you're actually wanting to use a different test runner. But the way that Vimtest is doing discovery on which test runner to try is there's a whole bunch of different rules. And the beautiful part about Vimtest is it's not a Python specific tool. It's language agnostic, and it has discovery for a bunch of different languages. Like I actually wrote the one for Lua. So if you're ever working with Lua, you can use Vimtest because it was driving me crazy that I couldn't. So I use Lua Busted over there is the name of the test runner, and I added that feature to this particular library. Anyway, so since it does discovery, how does it do discovery? For a Django project, there's typically a manage.py file. And so Vimtest will look for that file. And if it finds it, it's going to assume that you want the Django test runner, which is going to be based on unit test. And so what I had to do is I had to change my configuration with Vimtest to say, no. You're going to use a different test runner. And it's a file that I never talk about because I usually don't talk about my Vim configuration. But if you look in my app, you're going to find this file right here, vimrc local.vim. And here is where I'm using Vimtest configuration style, and I'm explicitly setting a test runner. Now, this does not work by default with Vim. This is another plugin that I'm using, which is called, I think it's called Vim local Vimrc. It's this one. This is an ability to do per project settings. And if you're working with a team, like that might not work out so well. So you might have to do some other stuff. But for my project, knowing that I have Django, I add this config file, and it essentially overrides it and says, all right, well, you look like a Django project, but you told me you're PyTest, so I guess I'm going to run PyTest. And that's how this is working for me. So I don't know if that's your specific problem, but that's something you could try and give that a go. And if you are only using PyTest in all of your projects, you could add this particular line to your Vimrc and say, ignore any discovery mechanisms at all for Python. And notice how this is scoped. It's test, $, then the language, then the runner. Like, so they have methods of scoping it per language. So it's not like you're saying, I want to use the PyTest runner for every language, because that doesn't make any sense for JavaScript or Lua or any of these other things. So that's a thing that you could, without installing that local plugin, that's a thing you could try that might get the PyTest runner for you. Hopefully that answers your question. So finishing this off, like I said, this is going to be a shorter stream tonight. You can feel free to take a look at what I've got in my Vimrc, and then I guess my top three, if to reiterate, were the fuzzy file finder, which is here, the ripgrep, which, where did that go? Ripgrep is down here somewhere. There's different parts of it. The ripgrep right there, and then Vimtest right here. So those are what's like really critical to me. And there's some stuff about like how I manage and navigate splits and move around. There's some cool little things that you can learn, I think. Things that I've learned over my 16 years of editing with Vim. All right, so that's going to end it for this evening. I want to thank you all for joining in so much, or thank you so much for joining in. Let me English string that sentence together properly. If you could do me a favor, leave a like on this stream. That really helps others discover it. And if you like the content, you want to support me, you're welcome to do so. I have an account at patreon.com/mblayman. I do want to shout out to my patrons of Rupert, Andrew, Dragos, Ryan, Patrick, Eric, Fred, Aaron, Philip, Miguel, Shivan, and Monty. Y'all make it possible for me to buy lights and cameras and new computers, and eventually there'll be a new monitor here so that I can stop can fill in the screen better and do better stuff. So a lot of the money that I get here, it goes right back into the stream rather than my pocketbook. Although I'm not going to lie to you and say that I don't take some money and use it for personal purposes. I do like feed my family and stuff. So that is an element of where some of that money goes. Incipia videos. Let me take a quick look at your question. You have an interview. Congratulations. The recruiter told you it's going to be a 1-hour interview and it'd be one and done. Interesting. Any questions to watch out for? Well, I have very strong opinions about interviews. It sounds like I'm curious of like the fact that you're saying it's a one and done interview of 1 hour. Like how that sounds impossible to hire somebody at that level of depth. So to me, that sounds more like a screening interview, and that if you got through that screen, then there'd be follow-up stuff. Based on that, I don't know the company you're going for. Some companies, especially if you're doing like the more San Francisco, Silicon Valley area stuff, are going to focus more on algorithms and all of that junk. I hate that stuff. I think it's a real shame that our industry focuses so much on that kind of stuff. Oh, contract to hire. I see. So I have in the past brushed up on algorithm work because even though like I have a computer science degree and a computer engineering degree, like I have the kind of degrees that these are supposed questions are targeting, but when you don't use it in 20 years, like you forget this stuff. So I always have to brush up on some basic algorithm knowledge. That's useful. It sort of depends on the role you're going for. So if it's a web stuff, make sure you can, my recommendation and how I would probably interview people is seeing what they know about how to actually build web technologies. So if you're being a contract for hire and you're going to be asked to build Python APIs, you had better know how to do some of that. And like if I were interviewing you and I saw that you didn't have knowledge in any framework, that would be the big red flag that I'd be worried that you wouldn't be able to do the work. And so I don't have a lot to add beyond that, except to say good luck. So brush up on the technology that you know that the role is hiring for, and I think that might serve you well. Anyway, that's where I'm going to leave it. Thank you all for the questions this evening. Again, leave me a like if you can. If you didn't like it, well, sorry. I'll try better next time, and I'll catch you all later. Take care.